What started as a routine late-night interview quickly spiraled into television chaos when legendary actor Robert De Niro and host Jimmy Kimmel clashed over politics, leading to an explosive confrontation that ended with security escorting the Oscar winner off set. "So, Robert, you've been pretty vocal about politics lately," Kimmel began, his tone carrying an edge that regular viewers might have missed. "Some people are saying you've gone a bit overboard with your public statements. What do you say to those critics?" De Niro's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He leaned back in his chair, his steely gaze fixed on the host. "Jimmy, I've always spoken my mind. That's what being an American is about. But I'm curious why you're framing it that way." The audience sensed the shift immediately. What should have been light promotional chatter for De Niro's latest film was already veering into dangerous territory. Kimmel pressed forward, seemingly oblivious to the warning signs. "Well, you did call certain politicians some pretty colorful names at public events. Don't you think that kind of language undermines your credibility as an artist?" Kimmel's voice carried a condescending tone that made several audience members shift uncomfortably in their seats. De Niro's eyes narrowed. "Are you seriously questioning my credibility? I've been in this business for 50 years, Jimmy. I've earned the right to speak my mind about the direction of this country. But don't you think celebrities should stay out of politics?" Kimmel shot back, his smile never wavering but his voice growing sharper. "I mean, what makes your opinion more valuable than anyone else's?" The legendary actor's composure began to crack. "What makes my opinion valuable is that I'm a citizen, just like everyone else. But apparently you think I should just shut up and dance for your entertainment." Kimmel chuckled, but it was hollow and forced. "I'm just saying, maybe stick to what you know best. Acting, not political commentary." The studio fell silent. Even the band members exchanged glances, sensing that something was about to explode. De Niro leaned forward, his voice dropping to that familiar menacing whisper that had made him famous in countless mob films. "You know what, Jimmy? I came here tonight to talk about my work, my craft, the things I'm passionate about. But instead, you want to turn this into some kind of political hit job. What's your agenda here?" Kimmel's facade began to slip. "There's no agenda, Bobby. I'm just asking the questions my audience wants to hear." "Your audience?" De Niro's voice rose slightly. "Or your network executives? Because this feels like an ambush to me." The host's smile disappeared entirely. "Look, if you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." That was the moment everything changed. De Niro's face flushed with anger and his hands gripped the arms of his chair. "Can't handle tough questions? Kid, I was giving interviews when you were still in diapers. But there's a difference between tough questions and disrespectful bullying." The audience was now completely silent, watching this legendary figure face off against their regular late-night host. Some began to murmur among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. "I'm not bullying anyone," Kimmel protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm doing my job." "Your job?" De Niro stood up abruptly, towering over the seated host. "Your job is to entertain people, not to ambush your guests with gotcha questions designed to make them look bad." Kimmel remained seated, but his body language became defensive. "Sit down, Bobby. You're making a scene." The words hung in the air like a challenge. De Niro's eyes flashed with something dangerous, something that reminded everyone in that studio why he was so convincing playing tough guys on screen. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every second of what was quickly becoming one of the most explosive moments in late-night television history. "Making a scene?" De Niro repeated slowly, his voice carrying decades of barely contained fury. "You haven't seen anything yet." The studio lights seemed to dim as the weight of De Niro's words settled over the set. Kimmel shifted in his chair, finally realizing that he had pushed one of Hollywood's most respected actors too far. The band leader looked ready to start playing music to cut to commercial, but the tension was too thick to break. "Bobby, come on." Kimmel said, his voice now noticeably shakier. "Let's just take it down a notch here." Take it down a notch? De Niro's laugh was cold and bitter. "You invite me on your show, then spend the entire time trying to humiliate me, and now you want me to calm down." The audience was completely captivated, some pulling out their phones despite the no-recording policy. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was raw, unfiltered confrontation between two men with nothing left to lose. Kimmel tried to regain control. "Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. I was just trying to have a conversation about current events." "A conversation?" De Niro stepped closer to the desk, his presence filling the space between them. "You call that a conversation? You were lecturing me like I'm some ignorant fool who doesn't understand how the world works." The host's hands fidgeted with his note cards. "I never said that." "You didn't have to say it. Your whole attitude, your condescending tone, the way you've been smirking at me since I sat down. You think this is funny?" Kimmel's famous wit seemed to have abandoned him entirely. "I'm just doing my show the way I always do it." "Then maybe that's the problem," De Niro shot back. "Maybe your show has become less about entertainment and more about tearing people down for your own amusement." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Several audience members nodded in agreement, and Kimmel could sense the room turning against him. His producers were frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, but he was too deep in the confrontation to back down now. "That's not true," Kimmel protested weakly. "I respect all my guests." "Respect?" De Niro's voice rose again. "You call this respect? You ambushed me with political questions, dismissed my right to have opinions, and now you're sitting there acting like I'm the problem?" The veteran actor began pacing behind his chair, his energy filling the entire studio. "I've been coming on talk shows since before you were born, kid. I know the difference between a professional interview and a setup." Kimmel's face was flushing. Red now, his carefully crafted television persona crumbling under the pressure. "I wasn't setting you up for anything. Really. Then why did you lead with the most controversial thing you could think of? Why didn't you ask me about my new film, my career, my family? Instead, you went straight for the political jugular." The audience was now openly murmuring their agreement. Some began to boo, and it wasn't clear if they were booing De Niro or Kimmel. The host looked around desperately, searching for support that wasn't coming. "I ask tough questions," Kimmel said, his voice getting defensive. "That's what journalists do." "Journalists?" De Niro stopped pacing and stared directly at him. "Is that what you think you are? A journalist? You're a comedian who got lucky enough to get his own show." The insult landed with devastating precision. Kimmel's face went from red to pale in seconds. "That's enough," he said quietly. "Oh, now it's enough?" De Niro leaned against the desk, bringing himself eye-level with the seated host. "It wasn't enough when you were trying to make me look like an idiot in front of your audience. It wasn't enough when you were questioning my credibility and telling me to stay in my lane." The two men stared at each other across the desk, the tension so thick it was almost visible. The studio audience was completely silent now, watching this legendary confrontation unfold before their eyes. Security guards had quietly moved closer to the set, sensing that the situation was spiraling beyond anyone's control. Kimmel made one last desperate attempt to salvage the interview. "Look, why don't we start over? We can talk about your film." But De Niro was beyond reconciliation now. His eyes burned with an intensity that had made him famous in dozens of films, but this time it was completely real. "Start over?" De Niro's voice was dangerously quiet. "You think you can just erase the last 10 minutes? Pretend you didn't just spend this entire time trying to destroy my reputation on live television?" Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but De Niro cut him off with a raised hand. The gesture was so commanding that even the host fell silent. "No, Jimmy. You wanted to play this game, so let's finish it. You want to talk about staying in lanes? Let me tell you something about lanes." De Niro's voice began to rise again, each word deliberate and cutting. I've dedicated my entire life to my craft. I've worked with the greatest directors, told stories that matter, created characters that will outlive both of us. The audience was completely transfixed. This wasn't just an argument anymore. It was a masterclass in controlled fury from one of cinema's greatest performers. And you, De Niro continued, pointing directly at Kimmel, you make jokes about people's appearances and read mean tweets for laughs. So don't you dare lecture me about credibility. Kimmel's face was now completely drained of color. His usual quick wit had abandoned him entirely, leaving him looking small and exposed behind his oversized desk. I've been doing this show for 20 years, he managed to stammer. 20 years of what? De Niro shot back immediately. 20 years of hiding behind a desk, taking cheap shots at people who can't fight back? 20 years of thinking that having a television show makes you important? The verbal assault was relentless. Members of the audience began to gasp audibly at the sheer brutality of De Niro's words. Some were recording despite the rules, sensing they were witnessing television history. At least when I play a tough guy, people know it's just acting. De Niro continued, his voice dripping with contempt. But you actually think you're tough because you can make fun of people from behind your little desk with your little jokes written by a team of writers. Kimmel tried to stand up, perhaps to match De Niro's physical presence, but his legs seemed unsteady. You don't know anything about me or what I do. I know enough, De Niro replied instantly. I know you invited me here under false pretenses. I know you thought you could embarrass a 70-year-old man for ratings. I know you figured I'd just sit here and take it, because that's what good little guests are supposed to do. The actor began moving around the desk, and security took a step forward, unsure whether to intervene. The band leader was making frantic gestures, but no one seemed willing to interrupt what was becoming the most explosive moment in late-night television history. But here's what you didn't know, De Niro said, now standing directly beside Kimmel's chair. You picked the wrong guy to mess with tonight. Kimmel finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. This is my show. You can't talk to me like this on my own show. The words were meant to sound authoritative, but they came across as desperate and pathetic. De Niro actually laughed, a sound devoid of any humor. Your show? He gestured to the audience, many of whom were now openly supporting him with nods and quiet cheers. Look around, Jimmy. Whose side do you think they're on right now? The host looked out at his studio audience, the people who usually hung on his every word and laughed at his every joke. Tonight, they were staring at him with a mixture of disappointment and disgust. Some were shaking their heads, others were whispering among themselves. The loyal audience that had supported him for years was watching him get systematically destroyed by his own guest. They came here to be entertained, Kimmel said weakly. Oh, they're being entertained all right, De Niro replied with a cold smile. They're watching a master class in how not to treat people. They're seeing what happens when someone finally stands up to a bully. The word bully hung in the air like an accusation that couldn't be taken back. Kimmel's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, searching for some comeback that would never come. That's what you are, isn't it? De Niro pressed on, sensing his opponent's complete defeat. A bully who hides behind jokes and thinks that makes it okay. Well, tonight you picked on someone who fights back. The confrontation had reached its peak, with De Niro standing victorious over the completely demoralized host. The studio was electric with tension, everyone sensing that something unprecedented was about to happen. De Niro looked down at Kimmel with unmistakable disgust. You know what the real tragedy is here, Jimmy? You had a platform. You had influence. You could have used it to lift people up, to celebrate talent, to bring joy to people's lives. Instead, you chose to be a small, petty man who gets his kicks from tearing others down. Kimmel's hands were visibly shaking now. He tried one last desperate attempt to regain some dignity. I think we should go to commercial. Oh no, De Niro said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded movie sets for decades. "We're not going anywhere. You started this, and I'm going to finish it." The legendary actor turned to face the audience directly, his presence commanding every person in that studio. "Ladies and gentlemen, I came here tonight to talk about my work, my passion, the things that matter to me. Instead, I was subjected to an ambush by someone who thinks entertainment means humiliation." The audience erupted in spontaneous applause. It started with a few people and quickly spread throughout the entire studio. Even some of the crew members were clapping, their usual loyalty to the show temporarily forgotten in the face of De Niro's righteousness. Kimmel watched in horror as his own audience applauded his destruction. "Please," he whispered, though whether he was talking to De Niro or his audience was unclear. "You want to know what real professionalism looks like?" De Niro continued, addressing the crowd. "It's treating your guests with respect. It's asking thoughtful questions about their work, not trying to score cheap political points. It's understanding that when someone comes on your show, they're trusting you with their reputation." The applause grew louder. Someone in the back shouted, "Tell him, Bobby!" and others joined in with shouts of agreement. The studio had transformed from Kimmel's domain into De Niro's courtroom. "I've been in this business for 50 years. Daddy," Niro said, his voice now calm but still carrying tremendous power. "I've worked with everyone from Martin Scorsese to Francis Ford Coppola. I've been interviewed by the best and the worst, but I have never, ever been treated with such disrespect by someone who's supposed to be a professional." Kimmel made one final pathetic attempt to salvage the situation. "Bobby, I'm sorry if you felt—" "Don't you dare," De Niro cut him off sharply. "Don't you dare try to make this about my feelings. This isn't about hurt feelings, Jimmy. This is about your complete lack of professionalism and basic human decency." The actor began walking toward the exit, but he wasn't done yet. He turned back to face both Kimmel and the audience one final time. "To everyone watching at home, let me tell you something. Respect is earned, not given. And tonight, you've seen what happens when someone who hasn't earned respect tries to tear down someone who has." The audience gave him a standing ovation. The entire studio was on its feet, applauding wildly as De Niro made his way toward the exit. Even the camera operators were clapping, though they kept filming. Kimmel remained slumped in his chair, looking like a defeated man. His usual confidence had been completely stripped away, leaving him exposed as the small, vindictive person De Niro had revealed him to be. "And Jimmy," De Niro called out one last time as he reached the edge of the set, "next time you want to ambush someone, pick on someone your own size." With that, Robert De Niro walked off the set of Jimmy Kimmel Live, leaving behind a stunned studio audience, a humiliated host, and what would become one of the most talked-about moments in television history. Security didn't need to escort anyone out. The legendary actor had said everything he needed to say and left on his own terms, with his dignity intact and his reputation enhanced. Behind him, Kimmel sat alone at his desk, facing an audience that had witnessed his complete professional destruction. The cameras kept rolling for several more seconds, capturing Kimmel's stunned silence and the audience's continued applause for the man who had just walked out. It was clear that something fundamental had shifted in that studio. The power dynamic that had existed for years had been completely shattered in the span of one unforgettable confrontation. When the show finally did cut to commercial, the damage was already done. Social media was exploding with clips of the confrontation, and by morning, Jimmy Kimmel's reputation would be in ruins while Robert De Niro's stock had never been higher.